Thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it. This hammer was given to me by UBYAF. This is the best gift I've gotten at any yeah. Just to beat everybody to the meme, yes, it's a normal-sized gavel. Yes. And it says upon it, Hebrew hammer, whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Shapiro. So far, so good. Well, it's amazing to be here at University at Buffalo. When I was growing up, I actually always had a soft spot for the Buffalo Bills. I used to watch Jim Kelly play. And when my wife and I were dating, we actually decided to take a trip around Christmas time to Niagara Falls, which is just something Californians think is a good idea. So that's the last time I was in Buffalo. That was 11 years ago, and it was not good. And I'll say that. We had just been engaged, and we did a trip where we went to Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., and then we decided we would go to Niagara Falls for New Year's, not realizing, of course, that there's this thing called snow and cold. And so we got up here. There was no food, because I keep kosher. We keep kosher. So all we had was literally for 24 hours a bag of bagel chips. And I remember that we went to a local Holiday Inn because we couldn't afford anything else. And we stopped at the front desk and we said, we need a limo we need some sort of car. We just need a car to get to Niagara Falls. And of course, this being a relatively cheap hotel, the person behind the desk had some sort of kickback arrangement with some guy. And so us being idiots, we were like, sure, that guy. So the guy pulls up and he's driving about a 1979 Cadillac limousine with a red velvet interior. And we trepidatiously get in the back of the limo, and we have our bag, clutching our bag of bagel chips like the poor urchins that we were. And the limo driver starts talking to us. He tells us that he's been married 6 times, and he explains that he is hungry and reaches back into our bag of bagel chips and proceeds to start noshing on our only food, and then decides he's going to give marital advice to my wife. And I figured, okay, he's married 6 times, he must know something. And the only piece of advice that I actually remember was him just saying over and over and over, keep the spice alive. And her looking at me like, I want to die. The good news is we've been married for 10 years. The bad news is we haven't been back to Buffalo since. But this is a lot better. This is a lot better. So I really appreciate you guys coming out. Well, tonight I want to talk about the hot topic of the day, the relations between men and women. If you listen to the media, or if you live on a college campus, chances are pretty good you think that we here in the United States are in the middle of a war between the sexes. And that, of course, is particularly true following the saga of Brett Kavanaugh that we just watched, in which the political left, including the mainstream Democratic Party, decided that belief in the presumption of innocence and due process of law did not apply to men. They decided that if you're a Republican man, or if you're a conservative man, or if indeed you are merely a textualist interpreting constitutional scholar of a man, then this means that any accusation should be enough to take you down. Now, none of this is to say that we shouldn't take accusations seriously. Of course we should. But before you can destroy a man's life, it appears that you might need one shred of corroborating evidence, like anything. And the fact that the left refused that was just an example of the left trying to polarize the Democratic Party, trying to polarize the country on an issue where basically everybody agrees. See, this is the thing about the Me Too movement. Everybody basically agrees with the point. No one who is of good heart wants to see women mistreated. No one who is of good heart wants to see women who are sexually assaulted and sexually mistreated not taken seriously. We all agree with this. But the left in this country has an unfortunate habit, and that is that on issues where we all agree, the left will pick a bad example, and then when people react badly to the bad example, they will suggest that the main principle is being disrespected. So they will say, well, we all believe in Me Too. And we'll say, right, we all believe in Me Too. And then they'll say, okay, well, how about we ruin this guy's life based on an uncorroborated allegation from 36 years ago? And then we're like, well, we might want, like, some evidence, please. And they go, oh, you don't believe in Me Too. If you believed in Me Too, then obviously you would want this guy's life ruined. All of this makes for some pretty ugly talk. It makes for a pretty ugly climate in the room. It's rather insane, and it's particularly insane in a society where women are treated better than any society in the history of mankind. Okay, to put America's female existence in perspective, America's females are freer, richer, more prosperous, less ill-treated than any women in the history of humankind ever, bar none. Okay, there may be an argument about whether some women are treated better in places like Norway, but that's about the only argument. Now, I want to talk tonight about the radical feminist movement, because here's the truth. The modern feminist movement, which has radicalized itself, is a disgraceful departure from the original feminist movement. I believe that I am an original feminist. Not because I'm old, but just because I believe in the principles of original feminism. I think original feminism was about certain basic rights, basic human equality, the ability for women to vote, to get any job for which they were qualified, to make decisions about marriage and child rearing for themselves. I believe in all of those things. When I was growing up, my mom was the one who worked, and my dad stayed at home with the kids. I am rather famously married to a doctor myself. I spend more time at home with my own kids than my wife does because she chooses to be a doctor. And then when she is done with her residency, she wants to work on a per diem basis so she can spend more time with the kids, and I support her choices all the way through. When she took time off with our kids, I supported it, and when she does not take time off because she wants to get through her residency, I support it, because I am essentially a feminist. But that's first wave feminism. Then came the radicals. Feminism moved from being about achieving equal rights for women to something different. Instead, feminism was turned into a fight over three chief ideas. One, men and women are absolutely identical. Not they have equal rights, not they should be treated with equal opportunity, but they are absolutely identical. There are no differences between men and women. Second, that the patriarchy, every institution of American society, the freest, best society in the history of mankind, all of those institutions are reflective of an evil patriarchal system. And finally, we need a new standard, we need new mores to replace the old patriarchal standard. So these are the three ideas. Men and women are exactly the same. The patriarchy is responsible for everything bad. Tear down the patriarchy and replace it with something new. Now, these ideas were all based on one central point, that all social wrongs are the product of power hierarchies, that all inequalities are inequities, that any disproportion between men and women in any particular sphere of life had to be due to some sort of discrimination, as opposed to free choice that manifests as disproportion. Foundational pillars of Western civilization, according to this radical feminist take, could be torn down without harming women. Such destruction would actually empower women, but that's not what happened. These ideas were catastrophically, terribly, horribly wrong. Tonight we're going to look at how radical feminism ruined the most important institutions in a functioning society, and in the process actually leads to less happiness for women. But before that, we have to start with some basic science. So I hate to break it to the gender studies majors in the room. Number one, I don't know where you're going to get a job. That's the first thing I hate to break to you. But there are only so many jobs at academic journals that publish papers about dog park rape and such. But that was actually a reference to an actual paper that was published by a feminist journal. I don't know if you followed this story. It's a great story. Apparently, there are these academics who published 7 fake papers in top academic journals in gender studies. And one of them was about how dog parks and dogs humping one another was actually a reinforcement for heteronormativity. This was published in a gender studies journal. So I wasn't just making that up, okay? Here's the second thing I hate to break to the gender studies major in the class. Sex is not a social construct. Sex is not a social construct. And gender is not a social construct. Now, the idea that gender and sex are completely separate is, of course, very silly. There are certain aspects of gender, masculine and feminine, that are, of course, social constructs. But that does not mean that the vast majority of things that distinguish men from women are social constructs. That's just nonsense. Men and women, on average, are not the same. You know how I know this? Because I have functioning retinas and a functioning prefrontal cortex. I have a child. I have 2 children. One is a girl, one is a boy. They are extraordinarily different because boys and girls are different. We used to know these things because we had not frontally lobotomized ourselves to facts. Men and women, boys and girls, they are not identical in how they think, what they desire, or how they act. They are not identical in various areas of mental aptitude. In some cases, women are stronger, and in some cases, men are stronger. Or in distribution of aptitude in various fields, or in physical aptitude. Treating men and women as identical, as though they are identical, suggesting they are the same except for the penis or the vagina, is anti-scientific idiocy. When people say things like the penis is not a gendered organ. What? Okay. There's an actual push a few weeks ago for people to call vaginas front holes because they didn't want to. I mean, I can't imagine what President Trump would even say about that on an Access Hollywood tape. As Harvard psychology professor Steven Pinker says, differences between the sexes are part of the human condition. And by the way, they're a great part of the human condition. One of the nice things about life is that men and women are different. This attempt to obliterate differences between men and women, beyond being idiotic and anti-scientific, is actually no fun at all. Okay, we call average attributes and behaviors of men masculinity. We call average attributes and behaviors of women femininity. Gender studies theorists, as overpaid navel gazers, try to separate gender from sex, suggesting that attributes and behaviors are entirely socially constructed. Of course, there may be some behaviors that are socially constructed, as I said, but to honestly believe that all gender differences are separate from sex requires that you were dropped on your head as a baby, repeatedly. Like your parents dropped you, and then they picked you up again and forcibly turned you upside down and then dropped you again on your head. Boys and girls are different. For example, many gender theorists have attempted to claim that boys and girls only like different toys because evil corporations decided that boys should have guns and girls should have dolls. Sweden has actually attempted to force boys to play with dolls and to force girls to play with guns or trucks or stereotypically masculine toys. This is silly talk. Okay, play differences between the sexes exist in rhesus monkeys. They really do. They've done studies. They found that our primate ancestors have sexual differences between how they treat toys. This is biologically innate. To take another example, the distribution of men and women in terms of mathematics performance is different. Studies suggest that while men and women on average perform the same in math, the bell curve is not exactly the same. Men tend to have a much more shallow bell curve, and women tend to have a steeper bell curve. What that means is that the fat tail ends of the bell curve are different. Right? So while the average can be the same, if the bell curve for mathematics IQ for women, for example, looks like this, okay, then the tail ends are a lot thinner. If it looks like this for men, the average is the same, but the fat tail ends are a lot thicker. That means you got a lot of men who are really dumb at math and a lot of men who are really smart at math. Okay, that means that the distribution in top companies for those fields may in fact be determined, at least in part, by differences in aptitude with regard to this stuff. That's not sexist. Okay, that's just reality. And that's not horrible, it's not terrible. It's also true that women are better than men at a great many things, including interpersonal relationships, which is why the vast majority of people who are in interpersonal relationship fields tend to be women. And yes, men and women differ in how they treat sex too. I know there's a big bugaboo for radical feminists. You're not supposed to talk about this. Men and women are supposedly we treat sex exactly the same. Again, have you met a man? Have you met a woman? Okay. Men are far more interested in variety and frequency than women on average. Women are far more interested in stability, comfort, and intimacy. Why? Because evolution says so. The reason evolution says so is because men are attempting to spread their genetic material, and women have to be selective about exactly whom they select to be the people with whom they mate. Because women only get a couple of shots at deciding who the dad of the baby is going to be. Whereas men can basically go out and do whatever they want. Okay, evolution drives male sex drive. It is not the same thing as female sex drive, and the idiocy that suggests it is just that. It's just unbelievably stupid. My favorite example of this, there's a very famous experiment by a couple of academics named Clark and Hatfield from 1989, and here's what they did. What they did is they got an attractive male and an attractive female, and they sent these people into bars to try and pick people up. So they had the men and this attractive man go into a bar and find all the women in the bar and say to them, want to come home tonight and have sex with me. And then they had a woman go into the bar and say to all the men in the bar, want to come home tonight and have sex with me. Hey, you're all laughing because you know the result before I say it. Men, because men are pigs, said yes 75% of the time. We are built to be pigs. That's what we do. That's why we need civilization and marriage to civilize us and make us better and channel all those aggressive, terrible instincts toward actually building a home and a life and defending women and building civilizations. That's why we created a civilization, was to stop men from being who they naturally are. 75% of men said, hell yeah, let's do this thing. Okay, you know what percentage of women said yes to this proposition? 0. 0. No women, not a woman. Why? Because women aren't idiots about sex. Only men are idiots about sex, as a general rule, unless the feminist movement teaches them that it's actually valuable and feminist to be an idiot about sex. Then we can indulge our seamier side. As psychologists say, there is a reason that sperm is cheap and eggs are expensive. Okay, so let's start with institutions that radical feminism has had a massively terrible impact on. Let's start with the central institution for any functioning society, and that, of course, is the institution of marriage. So marriage is innately an amazing institution for women. For women. Okay, that does not mean that every aspect of marriage was always great for women. Obviously, legal arrangements where women were supposedly men's property were bad. Bigamy was awful, right? There were certain aspects of marriage that were bad. But the monogamous standard of marriage and its place as the traditional standard in society was really, really good for women. Why? Because men could not logically expect women to go to bed with them without a serious commitment. Men were expected to value women's priorities. You actually had to, in the words of Nicholas Nassim Taleb, and this is not meant with any sort of pornographic reference, have some skin in the game. You actually had to attempt to make a commitment to another human being before the woman was expected to act in any sexual way. Men were expected to value stability and comfort and intimacy in a way men naturally do not when it comes to sex. Because marriage was actually about more than just pleasure. Marriage was about building a life together. Mostly, marriage was about raising kids that you were going to have together. And the vast majority of marriage for all of human civilization was based around the idea you were going to have kids with the person that you married. That was what marriage was based around. And so you had to choose based on your brain, not on what's going on downstairs. You're supposed to choose based on your brain. Is this a person I think is fit to raise my children, have children with, build a family with, and invest my time in? Then radical feminists decided that marriage had to be destroyed. They portrayed marriage as an awful cage. Betty Friedan, famous brain-challenged feminist, suggested that marriage was a, quote, comfortable concentration camp. That is a direct quote. She equated American marriage with concentration camps. She did this about 20 years after the Holocaust, so she was really, really with it. In fact, women didn't need men at all. As Gloria Steinem said, a woman needed a man like a fish needed a bicycle. Marriage could only survive by turning into sort of a rom-com, right? And then this is how we get the rom-com version of marriage. What marriage really is two people fall in love, and they get mutual pleasure from each other, and that's why they get married. There's only one problem with this, okay? That's not actually how marriage works. As any married person in the room can tell you, that's not how marriage works. You fall in love with somebody, and then you look for values that you share with that person if you want to have a good marriage. Because, as Jonathan Haidt talks about in his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, when it comes to relationships, at the very beginning of a relationship between a man and a woman, passion levels are very high, and what they call committed love is very low, because you don't know the person very much. And then, over time, passionate love declines because you're used to the person, and committed love goes way up. But if all you're expecting is passionate love from a marriage all the time, you're going to get bored around year 3. Okay, and this is just innate to how human beings operate with one another. So if what you were expecting was to build a home with a person with commitment related, then you're getting what you expect in marriage. If what you were expecting is a never-ending joy of passionate lovemaking in Hawaii, forget it. It's not happening, guys. Okay, so but this lie was perpetrated, and so marriage suddenly had different expectations. Pew shows the top reason people now say they get married is love at 88%. Followed by making a lifelong commitment at 81% and companionship at 76%. All of these involve you and your spouse. What are the actual reason for marriage? You know, like having babies and bringing them up, which, as we will discuss in a second, I will explain why this is the actual reason for marriage. Only 49% of people say they get married to have kids, and only 30% of people say they get married to have their marriage recognized in any religious fashion. Now, listen, love is great. I love my wife. Commitment is great. I am committed to my wife. The reason I married my wife is because she is the person not only I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, she's the person I wanted to build a family with and raise children with. And she felt the same about me. And that's why we're 10 years in and going strong, thank God. With the change in how we see marriage as a mutually pleasurable arrangement as opposed to a goal-oriented partnership between two people, so are women happier after all of this? Right, this is the big question. Are we happier after all of this? Well, nope. So it turns out economists Betsy Stevenson and Justin Wolfers did a study on happiness trends among American citizens between 1970 and 2005. Now, 1970 is right around the time the radical feminist movement really starts to take over the country. What did they find? Well, it turns out men rated their overall life satisfaction higher than men in the 1970s. I wonder why. Might it have something to do with less commitment and more promiscuity? But what happened to women? Well, women's happiness scores decreased. So men stayed relatively stable, but women's happiness scores decreased. I can't imagine how that happened. And the gap between male and female happiness actually is reflected in Europe too. So it's not just an American problem. This is a Western problem. Women are now getting married later than ever, median age 28. Divorce rates are increasing. Marriage rates are steadily declining. Is any of this really great for men or women? I would argue not. I would argue that it's actually a pretty negative impact on a lot of women. There are studies that show that of all the women who don't have kids, only 10% select not to have kids. When you ask women who are 45, 50 years old and never had kids, why didn't you have kids? Only 10% say I didn't want them, which means that a huge percentage of women who didn't have kids just couldn't. And not for biological reasons necessarily, right? Maybe because they got married too late, maybe because they were too invested in career. Life is a series of trade-offs, and if we fail to recognize that trade-offs exist, what you're doing is lying to people. Okay, so radical feminism hasn't just impacted marriage in negative ways, it's also impacted in really severe and negative ways motherhood and child rearing. The death of marriage wasn't just bad for women and men, it was really, really terrible for children. Disconnecting marriage from children didn't stop kids from being born, it just meant that kids didn't have dads. Single motherhood is the single greatest barrier to intergenerational economic growth in the United States. It is not close. On average, single motherhood damages children in irreparable ways, controlling for socioeconomic factors. The strongest predictor of doing prison time is single parenthood. Children from single-parent families account for 63% of all youth suicides, 70% of all teenage pregnancies, 71% of all adolescent substance abuse, 90% of homeless and runaway children. So while it may have been fun not to get married to that guy, it's not quite as fun when he's not around to help raise the kid. But this is what the radical feminist movement was proposing. Remember, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, unless it turns out that they're little fish. Then you might need another fish around to help take care of things. Single motherhood means that women themselves are trapped in poverty all too often. It's just bad for women. The poorest coterie in the United States of women are single moms. Now, radical feminists have a solution to this. They say, okay, just teach women not to have babies. That'll solve everything. Right? Then you don't have to worry about single motherhood. Just teach them that they don't have to have babies. This is what Simone de Beauvoir, author of The Second Sex and existentialist partner of Sartre, actually said. She said, quote, "No woman should be authorized to stay at home to raise her children." She says the government should ban people from staying at home to raise their kids. Society should be totally different. Women should not have that choice. We should take away the choice. Why? Because if there is such a choice, too many women will make that choice. So you have radical feminists actually arguing that women should be restricted in their choices because radical feminists want women to act a certain way. I'm not saying that because I'm an actual feminist. I want women to be able to choose what they want to do. Radical feminists are saying we have to encourage women not to make their own choices. We have to discourage them from making choices we don't like, such as staying home with their kids more often. Except it turns out that women actually kind of like having babies. Right? This notion that women don't want to have babies is so bizarre. Again, has anyone ever met a 35-year-old single woman? 35-year-old single women, there are some who choose not to be married. That's fine. The vast majority of women who are 35 and single are not supremely happy about being 35 and single and not having kids. Radical feminists then say that the priority, even if you have kids, is career. So what you should do is you should have a baby, and then you should go work someplace. You should make some money, and then you should pay some other lady to take care of your kid. That's the goal. Right? And that's how it works in California, where I am from. And in California, the reason that illegal immigrant labor is so prevalent in suburbia is specifically because of this. You basically hire an illegal immigrant from a different country to come and mother your child while you go to work specifically, like you're making 50 grand a year and you're paying that 50 grand to another person to take care of your kid. Really, this is what's happening. Now, this is not actually what a lot of women want. This is why people talk about the gender gap, okay? The reason the gender gap exists in terms of income is because women choose to have babies and spend more time at home. This is the main driver of the gender gap, and that's not a bad thing. I don't understand for the life of me, why we are telling women that their best and greatest superpower, creating another human from their own body, is less important than working as an associate law clerk. Working 2,100 billable hours, checking footnotes, is somehow more important than raising the next generation of human beings that you made with your own body and then bringing them up. Now, some people may choose that. Fine. Again, for the 1,000th time, that's fine. Do what you want. It's a free country. But if you're going to indoctrinate women to believe that happiness comes from working as an accountant, but not from spending more time with your children, there's not a single person who on their deathbed said, I wish I had done one more doc review. Not one. I speak as someone who worked at a law firm. Now, in order to preserve the myth that work as an accountant is more important than the actual female superpower of creating individual humans with your own body and then nourishing them using your own body, radical feminists have convinced men and women that the solution to all of this is abortion, that true feminism relies on abortion. What we really need to do is, obviously, if female empowerment means not having babies and not spending time with babies, then real female empowerment means killing babies, right? Just get rid of them. Right? You got a baby in the womb, so what? Your autonomy is more important than that baby. Now, for the pro-choicers in the room, I don't care about your body. I'm not interested in controlling your body. I don't want any part of your body. I'm a happily married man. What I do want is for you to stop trying to carve apart the other body that's inside your body. Okay, that's what I care about. I care about the other human in there. But radical feminists say, I'm not allowed to care about that. I'm a man. How can I say anything like that? How can a man have anything to say about the uterus? Because, as we all know, logic just simply stops if you're a man talking about this sort of thing. I mean, it's basically the same argument as saying you weren't a slaveholder in 1850s America, so how can you say anything about slavery? Stupidest argument in the world. Stupidest argument in the world. If a human rights violation is going on, if something that is morally harmful and irreparably harmful is going on, you have a duty as a moral human being to speak up about it. The carnage, by the way, since 1970, is about 50 million unborn children in the United States terminated before birth. Okay, finally, a couple other notes. So, you know, I want to get to the good part. Okay, so the best part is with regard to sexual relations, obviously, because radical feminists have ruined sex. They've ruined sex. Okay. The feminist movement originally made a correct assessment. They made an absolutely correct assessment. Men were acting like pigs. I agree. Traditionalists said the same thing. Wow, that's human nature. Men act like pigs. Right, we know. That's why we created a civilization, to stop men from doing such things. Okay. Men were acting like pigs. And the feminists said that pornography, the pornography industry treated women like meat and treated men to treat women like meat, which is also true. And then they said that men were being held to a double standard, which was also true. That men were not expected to hold themselves in or treat women with dignity, but women were expected to treat themselves with honor and dignity. All of that was true. And then feminists did the stupidest thing possible. They said, what about if we just have women act like men? Not ask men to act like human beings, ask women to act like men. So men act like pigs and we will act like men, and then everybody will be a pig together. It'll be great. And then they said, well, you know, the porn industry, like, look at the flip from the feminists on the porn industry. It's just amazing. They went from, in the 1970s and 1980s, saying pornography is evil because pornography objectifies women, to now pornography is a sign of female empowerment. Men will never stop laughing at how they somehow did this. Legitimately, men will never stop laughing at this joke. It is the greatest prank ever pulled in the history of mankind, that women somehow convinced themselves that pornography was empowering. There is not a man alive who watches pornography who thinks, boy, there is a strong, independent lady. Now, the lie was that women were going to be more sexually satisfied by this arrangement. You know, when they were married, they could only have sex with this one guy, and that was boring, and that was lazy, but now we can have affairs with whoever we want. We can have sex all the time. Yay, great. Only one problem. Only one problem. Virtually every study ever done shows that women have significantly more and better sex when they are in committed relationships. Women want intimacy in sex. They do. Okay, in a way that guys don't. All you have to, to ask a guy whether to have sex or not, if you ask a guy, do you want to have sex, his only question is, what time? If you ask a woman if she wants to have sex, you first have to answer a different question. Why? Right, why? Like, women actually want to know why, which seems like a good question. But the feminist movement suggested that why was a bad question. It should also be like men. It should just be when. Okay, the problem is that women don't actually treat sex like men do. They don't. Women want that intimacy, and if they don't get that intimacy, then they are confused and they are upset far more often than men. This is not true for every woman, but on average, women want a different thing from sex than men want from sex. For men, sex is much more about physical release, and for women, it's a lot more about emotional intimacy. Again, for evolutionary reasons. And this notion that if you just cast away emotional intimacy and then you just have sex with random strangers, that this is somehow going to make your life better. I don't, like, my God, how did this, who was able to perpetrate such a notion? It's unbelievable. It's idiotic for any number of reasons, okay? First of all, women are more physically vulnerable than men. You may have noticed this. Women are smaller and more physically vulnerable than men. And as we know, are far more often sexually abused. Do you think that women feel more comfortable or less comfortable in the presence of a stranger they just met 5 minutes ago who wants to have sex with them? What do you think? 28% of all rapes are committed by a stranger, another 45% are committed by an acquaintance, 25% are committed by a boyfriend or spouse. Okay, what this means is that marriage, relationships don't prevent rape, but they are also the vast minority of rapes in the country. Men who are emotionally invested in their spouses may commit sexual assault against wives and girlfriends, but they do so less often than strangers do. And there are a lot more men in relationships than having sex with strangers. Second, the traditional standard for sex used to be marriage, right? The societal presumption was that a woman didn't actually want to have sex with a man outside of marriage, so there was no expectation. And that expectation, you talk to a lot of young women, I talk to young women all over the country, a lot of them who feel, they will say that they feel pressured into sex by men. They feel like they have to have sex with men in order for the man to take them seriously. They feel like the man has an expectation of sex. Well, in society where marriage is the barrier to sex, that expectation went unfulfilled because everybody basically assumed that was ridiculous. But in a situation where men expect sex and women feel pressure to give sex in order to generate a relationship out of it, that is not good for women. That's not good for women. Well, we got rid of all the sort of traditional notions of what you had to do before you had sex. You know, courting a woman, trying to form a relationship with her, making decisions about values, getting married. We got rid of all of those basic presumptions, and now consent is the only standard. And that sounds good, right? Consent sounds great, because we all like consent. Consent's awesome, right? And in every area of life, consent is awesome. Well, there's only one problem. There's only one problem with this. It turns out that in matters of sex, there's some gray area when it comes to exactly how sexual relations work. That does not mean, there's black and white area, okay? So the black and white area is a guy wants to have sex, the woman says no, and then he violates her, right? That's black and white. We all agree that is a violation of consent. But what about when two people get drunk, go back to their dorm room, hook up? Was that some sort of sexual abuse? Was that a grave sin? Was that a rape? According to Title IX trials on campuses all over the country, it could be. That's why they've now instituted yes means yes in California, which is this bizarre standard where you're supposed to legitimately ask, like, I don't even know how you break down the gradations. Right? The idea is supposed to be that you ask, okay, may I kiss you now? May I touch your leg? May I touch your shoulder? May I stroke your hair? It's like Zeno's paradox. Like you have to get smaller and smaller in the areas of consent that you are asking. Right? There's a very funny bit in a Zooey Deschanel show, New Girl, where she's in high school and she wants to have sex with this guy she's been dating. It's prom night, and he's one of these guys. And he starts asking, can I kiss you? Can I touch your leg? And eventually she says, you can do whatever you want with me, just stop asking me all the questions. And then he says, you're being so aggressive with me, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. So she goes out and she has sex with, like, the gardener, right? But the reality is that not a single sexual act has ever been consummated in this fashion. No one has a signed, notarized yes means yes checklist when they have sex. No one ever in history. And it doesn't sound all that sexy, to be honest with you. But this nebulous state, encouraging promiscuity based solely on a vaguely defined consent where two people are drunk, or a guy says, do you want to do something? A girl says no, and then he starts kissing her, and then she says yes. Did she say no, or did she say yes? Right? To pretend this stuff doesn't exist is to, again, blind yourself to reality in the name of political correctness. If all the lines were this black and white, I would agree with them. But they are not always that black and white. Heather McDonald reports today, in 2015, the Association of American Universities conducted a sexual assault survey at 27 selective colleges. The vast majority of survey respondents, whom the AAU researchers classified as sexual assault victims, never reported their alleged assaults to their college's rape hotlines, sexual assault resource centers, or Title IX offices, much less to campus or city police. Why? Because they self-reported they did not think that what happened to them was that serious. Right? So that means that a lot of the statistics about unreported sexual assault depends on the woman's subjective perception of what exactly is going on. Radical feminism has encouraged that sort of subjectivity and then set no closing standard on the other end. This leaves women in a gray area and men in a gray area. It puts men in danger of being accused of things that they may not have done, and it puts women in danger of men believing they can push beyond boundaries of what is appropriate and normal. Radical feminism has undermined all of these things, again, based on that simple presumption that men and women are exactly the same. They are not. We all want to protect women. The only way that we can protect women and protect due process and protect the presumption of innocence is with some clear, actual, articulable standards. So what am I recommending after all of this? Well, I'm recommending a word that's kind of gone out of style these days between the sexes. Dignity. Men and women treating each other as individuals with honor, as creatures of God, everybody made in God's image. And it's your duty and your joy to honor and protect the person with whom you want to be intimate. Women treating themselves as worthy of that honor and demanding that honor from men. Like, that is what I am calling for. And if that sounds simple, that's because it actually is. It is not complex. Human nature is complex. Human nature is difficult. But setting moral standards is actually not that hard if you're committed to doing it. But if you're committed instead to tearing down those moral standards in the name of some brave new world, then of course you're going to end up in a really nasty gray area, which is where we are right now. What we require right now is a commitment to dignity and to honor, and that requires hard work, and it requires a commitment to women. Most of all, it requires decency. And if we can all be decent to one another, then we're all feminists in the end. Thanks so much.